And I'll never forget going into a hospital in South Louisiana and forming quality teams in a radiology department and putting a doctor on the team with the frontline workers and thinking, wow, well, we've done a great job setting up this team. We had one meeting, only the doctor spoke, and at the end of the meeting, somebody came back in the room and closed the door and said, you realize, like, you screwed the whole thing up by getting the doctor in here because we're scared to death to tell the doctor, like, we might have made a mistake.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the NXT Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here in the Propel Productions podcast studio in Baton Rouge, and we welcome our guest, Dr. Christel Slaughter, CEO of SSA Consultants. Christel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure.
I have never met you before, which is kind of amazing, but I have met your husband, Bill, when SSA facilitated a strategic planning session for B1 Bank. Many years ago. And back then, we were strategizing of how the board was going to get on the same page to grow our bank to $1 billion in assets, which was a major milestone. And today we're approaching $5 billion in assets.
So it was a really good session.
It was a great session. Yeah. So, I have done some research and I watched some things online, some presentations and interviews and Zoom calls and things like that. I feel like I know you from watching those. You're a brilliant lady and brilliant consultant, and I'm just grateful for you being here. So why don't we start by you telling us what SSA Consulting does?
So our firm was started in 1970 by my husband, Bill, and it has always existed in the management development, organizational development space, which means it's everything from strategic planning to executive coaching, helping organizations figure out what their problems are, and then practical solutions to those problems. We are not CPAs, although we have had consultants who had CPAs. We're not heavy-duty marketing. We'll do outreach and some PR with our clients, but we have a lot of good resources in our quote-unquote Rolodex, if you will, that we can refer our clients to. But we really stay in the space of helping organizations to be more successful through better leadership, better teams, systems of organizations to support people and performance, so incentive pay, anything we can do to help our clients be more successful.
You know, it's interesting. When an entrepreneur starts their business, typically they're alone or maybe a partner too, and they try to do everything in-house, right?
Correct.
And you hold on to that philosophy as long as you can to save money. And that sometimes can go on too long where, you really do need some outside help. but maybe don't know where to reach out to, and unaware, unfamiliar that there are businesses like yours that can really help them springboard their company. So why don't we walk through a few of the services that SSA Consultants provides clients, and give us a little maybe example or backstory of some of those.
Sure. So to the point that you just made, and I think it's very true, an entrepreneur usually is by himself or herself. Maybe he has a partner, but it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in the beginning, sweat equity, if you will. And there's actually, both my husband and I came out of academia. We were both college professors and have had colleagues from the university join us over the years or consult with us over the years. There's actually a theory about growing organizations. It's Griner's model of organization growth, which no one cares about in business. But when people come to us, it's usually at one of those transition points or crisis points. So an entrepreneur starts a business, they become successful, and then all of a sudden they begin to hire people, and that's a whole different ball game. Right. Being able to manage people, being able to get people aligned, on the same page, working together. A lot of times they'll bring us in either then or because they have to begin to delegate, they have to begin to clarify roles and things, so job descriptions and, organization design, org charts. And then they go a little bit further. And then, of course, the challenges really in some ways get harder, but in some ways they get easier because they're larger. So we've worked with a lot of businesses that have gone through those stages. Yeah,
and it would seem like, there's a path which you kind of described of how it should be done. But I suspect, that there's instances, or maybe the majority of the time, where entrepreneurs will grow a business and they'll grow it wrong, or their org chart will be all messed up, and then they come to you and say, "Help me figure this mess out."
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yes. Not only that, oftentimes sprinkled through the org chart are family members. Right. Or people that they have very close relationships with who are quasi-family members, and they may or may not be excellent in the role that they've been asked to play. And that, of course, creates some interesting challenges. And I like to say sometimes we function much like a physician where the client says, "I just don't feel well, but I'm not sure what's wrong, doc, so can you help me? I know we can do better. I know we're not as successful as we could be. I have some ideas, but we go in, we help diagnose that and come up with the treatment plan, if you will." Right. Sometimes you're like a counselor, and oftentimes small business owners have no one else really to talk to. Maybe their spouse at home who gets a little tired of it sometimes, but they have nobody to really bounce ideas off of or to share their thoughts and test ideas. And so for some organizations, we work with them for a few years, coming in maybe once a month. Some organizations, it's a project that has a start and end date. Yeah. We go away, maybe we come back later. There are large and small organizations in South Louisiana that we have worked with off and on for over 30 years. Yeah. And I got to tell you, that's wonderful. Yeah. It just makes you feel great.
I bet. Yeah. To watch their growth.
Yes.
And,
Yes. Uh-huh.
So what is your geographic range?
Well, interestingly enough, because of the petrochemical corridor, a lot of our clients have taken us to Canada. So there's fertilizer companies that have very, very large holdings in Canada. And my husband spent quite a lot of time in Calgary, where it's freezing cold. I went once, told him, "Thank you for taking me along. You have fun with that client." But some of our clients have taken us to Western Europe. We worked with a chemical company that needed a massive international cultural change. Wow. And so we were brought in to work side by side with the European consultant and help design the culture descriptors of what they wanted to be and then the implementation plan of how it was going to roll out, and then actually kicked it off and did train the trainers. And I in fact, Andrew, that was probably 20 years ago, and I went back to their sort of cultural design the other day because I had a client who is much, much smaller, but somewhat in the same situation. And I remember their first three sort of topics were do it, own it for the team and the customer. And it was to say, if you pass by something and it's not right, just do it. Just take care of it. Don't worry about if it's your job or not. And really own it. Own it for the company, for your team, et cetera. And it's for your team and for your customer. And it's just very simple. But then we had to define what each of those meant. So this is what this means. This is not what that means. Right. And it's fascinating.
So when you look back over the history of the company, I mean, when you started was about the start of the internet, right? When Bill started the business.
Oh, I think that was before the internet.
Yeah, right before.
Yeah.
Which is hard to imagine today, right? Yes. But as you and Bill look back over the history of your company, what strikes you as being the greatest changes when you look at what you're doing today versus back then?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So I joined in the early 80s, and we went through a big growth stage for a while based on what was going on in our client base, and have since sort of shrunk back to, I think, the size that we feel is optimum for our services. But what we've observed is certainly technology changes, and the internet, online opportunities for growth and sales, and watching our clients being very challenged, even to this day, with how to put their products and services online, how to build the backbone of that, and then how to, right now, trying to use social media is very foreign to a lot of our clients, and they have a hard time. How to use it effectively. Yes, exactly. We have a client that is a family-owned business, and they are in the food manufacturing area. And when everyone during the pandemic started shopping online for groceries, they weren't doing that. That was a very foreign thing to them. And I noticed in the stores that I was shopping online with that some of their competitors were actually in banner ads, and I never saw them there. And when we went back the next month to talk with the leadership team, they really had trouble understanding what I was trying to explain to them. And I had to get the computer out and get the hotspot and show them, here, if I wanted to order your product, anything like your product, it's very hard to ignore your competition. And so, that's nothing disparaging about them. It's just things are changing so fast in the world of technology that it's hard sometimes for a small business to catch up. I think there's a lot of other changes, workforce changes, people changes, literally people changes, and everyone focused on the millennials for so long. They're in their late 30s, early 40s. People forget there's people coming after them, and so the Generation Z, as they are called, are as different from our business owners as even more different than the millennials. Right. And so I think, we're always having to help our clients understand who really is their customer base, who really are their employees, and, how do we make sure we retain and help develop and grow those employees for the future.
So when you think about the big four, management consulting firms, the KPMGs, the Deloitte's, PricewaterhouseCoopers, guys, they deal, massive clients, international. How is SSA ever in competition with any of those big guys on certain accounts?
Well, I would say yes and no. So occasionally we have been in competition. More than likely, we are either subcontractors in some cases, And those are oftentimes large government projects or hospital system projects, or we come in after them. So we really see ourselves as implementation consultants. So we may do strategic planning. You mentioned B1 Bank. We might go in and do strategic planning. Sometimes the client will then hire you after that to help them implement certain elements of the plan that they find challenging, or they have executives who would like, a little bit of assistance with that. And so, there you might be taking McKinsey's strategies in a different case and helping to implement those strategies. So there's plenty of work to go around. We don't need to necessarily go toe to toe with the Bains of the world.
Yeah. So. And so, what industries does SSA find themselves focusing on?
That's a great question. And a lot of consulting firms specialize, and they work singularly with engineering firms or singularly with CPA firms. And we don't, and we don't for a reason. We think it's important not to get your clients' diseases. So quite often, when you work with the same industry or the same organization for a long period of time, you stop seeing the opportunities for improvement. You begin to see it just like the people inside the organization do. However, when you start seeing the trendsetters and you watch what they're going through, and that makes it sound very positive, but oftentimes it's painful change and transformation. Right. And you start with a healthcare system, or you start in the paper and pulp industry or petrochemical industry, and you watch what they're going through. Then you're able to transfer that to your other clients and help them get in the game. So in the 80s, there was a big push for continuous quality improvement, and we started in the industry sectors. We were brought in by our clients to help them implement this massive need for employee empowerment and helping employees find their voice. And healthcare was a little bit behind that. And I have to tell you, Andrew, I have so many wonderful memories of that, but it was a big, big change. And I'll never forget going into a hospital in South Louisiana and forming quality teams in a radiology department and putting a doctor on the team with the frontline workers and thinking, wow, well, we've done a great job setting up this team. We had one meeting, only the doctor spoke, and at the end of the meeting, somebody came back in the room and closed the door and said, you realize, like, you screwed the whole thing up by getting the doctor in here, because we're scared to death to tell the doctor, like, we might have made a mistake. And that's the whole point, is right. Candor and ground rules of why we're in this room talking about this. And so, that one sort of aha moment then, translated to many, many years of either your culture is ready for this, or we have to prepare people so that they are not afraid to talk about mistakes. So we got to fix your culture first. The saying is culture eats strategy. So I know you have a great strategy, but if you don't fix your culture, this is really not going to work.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so
it struck me as I was doing some research on your firm that your body of experience, must have grown, of course, grew throughout the years and decades as you go and visit clients, and maybe they need help with this particular part of their business, but they do this other parts of their business incredibly well. And you get to see that, and you get to see their culture and how they execute, and then take that, and it just seems to be an ever-growing body of expertise and yes. knowledge that you can then, put into play with other clients, which across different industries, which right. I think is fascinating.
It really is. And I'll go back to your question about the entrepreneur and where you pick up a client. So we had a client in the jewelry industry, and very successful, gorgeous jewelry, great salespeople, just an eye for design and elegance. And his office was in the middle of the jewelry store. And so he was able to see everything that went on. It was a bird's eye view, 360 view of everything that went on. Every transaction, every customer, every salesperson, all of it. And that was a blessing and a curse. And we were trying to help him grow his business, and he desperately wanted to grow, but he couldn't help himself. So every time one of his good customers came in and a salesperson went over and began helping that person, they seemed very comfortable. He couldn't stand it. He had to pop up and go out there, and then the next thing you know, he's doing the transaction, and the salesperson has moved on. And I'm interviewing these people, and they're saying he's killing us. He tells us he wants us to jump in, but when we do, so we had to go through that sort of little hurdle. But he had a process, and we had seen it, something very much like it in another client's business. And so in jewelry stores, lots of times they're putting their inventory out in the morning and picking it back up in the afternoon. And it's a very labor-intensive process. And so that's kind of dead time, if you will. What they started doing was what they call the plus 50 in this other industry, which was to actually use the time to have sort of on-the-job training while people are doing what they need to do to increase their sales by 50%. And it really worked. And what they would do is every single employee, salespeople, had to have the biggest objection they had the day before. Like, I really love this ruby necklace, and I know my wife would like it, but I just want to think about it a little bit more. Or, I like this Rolex, but I really, I'm not sure I want a Rolex. I might really want a tag, whatever. And so how would somebody handle that? The person left, or the person, didn't buy this and wanted something, less pricey or whatever. And the expertise that is housed within people's own staff is amazing. But there's no easy way to pull that out of people normally. And so you get new people in, you get somebody who's never sold a watch before, or, has not had the opportunity to go to these wonderful schools and training programs. And so you're just building off of, and it's culturally based, because what you're doing is you're having your more senior people who are sort of the upholders of the culture, who are helping to train the more junior players. And sometimes it's the junior player who has a breakthrough on something that they help, and senior person says, gosh, I never thought of that. So, those are the kinds of things. We don't have to be there for that to happen. We have to give the owner or the manager the concept, the thought, help them maybe with a little bit with the design of it, what it is and what it's not, and then call and support. How's it going? It's great. What should we do about this? Tweak it here and there. And I got to tell you, our partners were talking about this the other day. We were doing a performance evaluation for a new consultant, and we told her, if you don't get just a surge of feeling great after you help a client, and your idea pays off for them, then this is not the right business for you, because there's nothing more fulfilling. It's just wonderful. And it's not the paycheck, and it's not the fee or whatever you're getting out of the engagement. The personal fulfillment, the opportunity to help somebody do better, and all their employees and their families. And it's really a challenging and gratifying business to be in.
Good stuff. Christel, let's take a quick break there, get in a word from our sponsor, and we will be right back. We would like to thank Mbd Automation for their support of the NXT Entrepreneur Podcast. Mbd Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, and end users in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. Mbd Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If Mbd Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. And we are back with Dr. Christel Slaughter, CEO of SSA Consultants. Christel, I was so impressed with all of the boards and committees that you have served on, but so many that are so impressive. But a couple of that rise to the top for me was your service on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the chair of the Small Business Council. And similarly, being the past chair of the board of directors of the Federal Reserve Bank at the New Orleans branch. And I got to tell you, that is some impressive stuff.
Thank you.
So with that additional perspective that you had through those two particular organizations, I wanted to get your insight on some questions that relate to a lot of business owners today. Either insight through your business that you see some of your clients having to deal with, or from insight from these other organizations I mentioned. And I wanted to start with inflation and see if you can give me an insight on what you've seen, how real it is to the small business.
It's very real. It is very real, and it's really taking its toll. We do have some clients who are able to adjust prices and do that and have formulas for it and are not uncomfortable with it. But I would have to say most of our small to medium-sized businesses really agonize over price increases and don't have the sensitivity analysis to truly understand if we go up this much, we will probably have this much drop off. If we only go up this much, we may have a little bit less, a little bit more. It's sometimes a feel that an entrepreneur has from running a business over a period of time. Let's just take banks for an example. A bank will sometimes say, well, let's adjust these fees. Let's drop these fees. Let's try this. Let's see what the competitors are doing. Let's see what our customers like, don't like. But all of those are, significant adjustments that take a lot of back office time and effort to reprogram things. And so I don't think it comes as easily as people think.
So, I think we're, the administration, and I'm not trying to be political at all here at any point in this podcast, but the current administration is trying to convince us that this is temporary. Do you have any feedback from any of your clients that are concerned that maybe it's not?
Yes, and they're really struggling. I mean, that's probably too strong of a word, but they're really trying to analyze what's going on in the economy. So in one case, they're seeing consumer confidence is up. They're feeling good about things. Their orders outstrip their ability to satisfy them. And so they see a lot of opportunities for growth. However, there are a lot of challenges in that, whether it's workforce or supply chain or, you name it, the price of anything, utilities. And so I think, a business owner fascinates me to want to take that risk. And some of it it's because they have the eye on the prize. It's the risk reward type of thing. For a lot of them, it's just a dedicated desire to do whatever it is they've chosen to do in their business. But I think that the ones who are successful are the ones who really can get a sense of their market and what's going on in the market. They're reading everything they can possibly read. They're online. They're talking to people. A lot of them belong to organizations like YPO or EO or a networking group, a top 20 group that is across the country. And so they're able to have someone else who's going through somewhat the same thing to talk to. The Small Business Council is actually kind of an example of that at the U.S. Chamber, although people are from a variety of industries and businesses and in different parts of the country. We figured out where some of the trends start and we can connect with one another to share stories and solutions. So it's I think that they're aware that there is inflation, but they're not daunted by it.
Yeah. So I mean, the reality is it happens and it's experienced at the small business level, and then that's how we learn about it. So in Austin, I have several neighbors. Well, we've since moved subdivisions, but that are Dell employees, and they worked remotely for a long time. And so these guys, friends of mine, could kind of give me feedback from what they were experiencing, a slowdown here, or, acceleration there. And it was really interesting before the Great Recession to hear some of their feedback, like, yeah, it's not good out there. It's not, and yet the stock market was still good.
Right.
So it was really happening, and we could sense, they could sense it, and sure enough, it turned into a real deal. Supply chain issues, Christel is in the news all the time today, and it's really disruptive. It's really
truly.
I mean, if you look at car lots,
oh my goodness,
that are empty,
right?
And so we all have heard that that's about the chips available,
right.
and I'm not sure if it's more complex than that, but that's the story that we all hear, which is hard to fathom, right? How that could not be fixed, but at the same time, there's a demand issue in certain industries. You touched on it a second ago, and you mentioned a jeweler example a minute ago as well. And I was Christmas shopping for my wife in a jewelry store just yesterday, and finished up that business. I said, well, I'm just going to take a peek at some watches. And the sales lady said, well, we're out of Rolexes. I was like intrigued with that. And I said, is that a supply chain issue? She said, no, it's just a demand.
Yeah.
And so Rolex makes 1.2 million watches a year, and they simply are selling more than that.
Yes, they are. Right.
So you have inflation, you have supply chain issues, you have business disruption, all sorts of uncertainty, and yet certain things are just going gangbusters.
Right. There's a lot of pent-up consumer demand. There's a lot of desire to, I've been cooped up, and this pandemic has been really hard, and I'm going to be with my family for Christmas as an example, or I'm looking forward to, having this boat, car, watch, whatever it is that I've been wanting for a long time. And literally, we are hearing people say, I realize life is too short. So this is something that's really important to me or my family, my children. We're going to take a trip out to California. We're going to, go to the wine country. We're going to, we've always wanted to do this. And so I think that some of it is from that. I think that there is, mercifully, a lot of money floating around. I know that I'm not really a fan of big government, but I don't know what our firm or others would have done without the PPP grants when they came along. And I think that it was amazing because we got to see that firsthand in the Small Business Council and the U.S. Chamber Board. It came together very quickly, but it was done by some brilliant people. And I think that, there are a lot of people who are very appreciative of
and I am one of those because I agree with you that it was brilliantly executed, and I've even suggested it's maybe the most effective program that I've seen.
Totally.
I know in my business it was a very welcome assistance that did exactly as it was designed to do, which allowed me to hold on to employees while business turned down dramatically instead of letting them go and creating more of a problem. And it was in my particular example, it was flawless in its effect and its execution, and how they used a banking system to execute that plan or administrate that plan, and how effectively they did that. At least in my experience, and so that was one of the next questions I had for you is what your thoughts on that. But you saw it from your business as well as your clients' businesses.
Oh yes, and also from the banker side. So the reality is there were some bumps in the beginning because the SBA and Congress and the interpretation of things was slightly confusing. If you were an S corp, if you were an LLC, if you had partners, is it this? Is it that? What about people over $100,000? You know, so getting all that information straight. But once that happened, I think like you, from the business owner's perspective, it was pretty seamless. Our banking clients, though, they were going crazy in the background. You know, they had people who were having to learn new things right in the middle of having to deal with COVID. And so, but to their credit, I think everybody worked really hard together. I think we're going to look back on this time and find it just fascinating from a business recovery standpoint and economic recovery. And it was things like that that really made the difference. So luckily for business.
Well, and they had some good case studies, for lack of a better word, looking back on the Great Recession and how that, you know, quantitative easing worked and how that was executed. And I thought they did a great job with that.
I will tell you a funny story about that. I was asked to serve on the Federal Reserve Board, since you mentioned that. And when you are approved, you go to Washington, D.C. for an orientation, in this case with other new board members from the 6th District. So I was there with a woman who was a realtor from Naples, Florida, very, very polished, very smart business owner. And we were standing at the cocktail table, the bar, if you will, and we were talking. She was telling me how concerned she was because she had homes that were selling for 150% of their value. And she said, you know, this is just, I don't see how it's great for me. My commission's high. All my you know, brokers love it, but I don't see where this goes. And she said, honestly, it's got to crash. Something's going to happen. And right then, Alan Greenspan walked up, and I said, "Oh, Mr. Chairman, can I buy you a drink?" Of course, it's his bar, right? So, oh, sure, that's great. And this woman turned and said, "Oh, I was just talking about how worried I am about this." And when I'm telling you, he did the equivalent of patting her on the head. She was taller than he was, so he couldn't pat her on the head. But he patted her on the head and basically said, "Sweetie, don't worry about that." He didn't say the word sweetie, but it's just a little frothy right now. It'll all calm down. I didn't see her for 2 years. By then, we had gone through the major hurdle and just devastation of the economy pretty much collapsing. And she looked at me and she said, "I haven't seen you since our frothy conversation." I said, "Yeah." I'm not sure if, you know, I'd love to go back and say, what were you thinking at that moment in time?
So that was before his irrational exuberance comments.
Yes. But I do think that Ben Bernanke, going back to your point, who, you know, followed him, was a student of the Great Depression.
Right.
And so he was able to bring some things, even though it was controversial at the time. I think he brought some tools and ideas that helped us, you know, slowly get out of that. I was really worried about the pandemic. You know, people who did have to lay off workers, restaurants that were just absolutely closed and couldn't figure it out. But I'll be honest with you, Andrew, entrepreneurs are oftentimes very creative, and business owners and even people who run businesses for a board or for a single owner, they can be very, very resourceful. Right. And we saw this after Katrina in New Orleans, where we actually did a program of small business consulting. That money from the federal government came to the state, and we worked with the Department of Economic Development and the Small Business Administration, and we would send a team of consultants, not just our consultants, trained consultants, to go into businesses and say things like, "You have business interruption insurance. Everything is devastated around you. You need not to open for a while. Let the market come back." We helped people figure out what other service lines they could get into. So if my restaurant is closed or it needs tremendous repairs, can I, you know, somehow go into the catering side of things. And so then when the pandemic happened, that memory and those pathways were, I saw them go right back in New Orleans, in that area in South Louisiana. But our clients in Utah had never been through that before. And so shifting to, or if I was catering large conventions, now I had to figure out, could I do home delivery? Could I do businesses that were open? And so it's very interesting to watch how well organizations can adapt. And sometimes they feel stuck. We go in, we work with them, whether it's a full-blown strategic plan or just a short sort of, let me kind of help you get through this transition time in your business life cycle. And they get on a good path and they take off from there.
A lot of challenges in business the last decade or so.
For sure.
We talked about the Great Recession. I wanted to ask your thoughts on the Great Resignation. Oh. And, I asked this of an economist in a presentation a couple of weeks ago. And I was initially curious as to whether some of the generosity of the government, the PPP we just mentioned about, in our perspective being very successful, and then you had the assistance that went to workers in the form of unemployment insurance, and it was very generous. Now, I'm saying that from the perspective of as a business owner, not a person receiving that benefit. I'm sure to the person receiving that benefit, it seemed very much needed and maybe not quite generous enough. But from the cost of compared to what we would normally experience, it seemed generous. But then it, some things started to happen around the same timeline. There was the talk of the increase in the minimum wage to $15 an hour in many parts of the country, and then we started seeing people either not going back to work and wondering, is some of this tied together, and did we go too far, or is it something completely different?
Well, research is showing that there are people who are still not back in the working population because they have enough money. And the latest poll that was done by the U.S. Chamber said that some of them are going to stay out for as long as 6 months more. So at the height of the pandemic, I think there were 21 million workers who did not have jobs. 5 million women went home, mainly because their children were home and childcare. That was just, can you imagine? And people, who were wonderful, trained engineers and accountants and scientists now are third grade teachers because their children are home in front of a, computer screen. So a lot of those women have not gone back. A significant number have. But we really do have a serious child care issue in this country. We haven't wrestled with it well enough, and some of our really smart clients are taking care of that. Either they were doing that before the pandemic and they were able to keep people because of those benefits, or they're realizing now, I need to find ways to help our families with this. It's not just for women. We have a consultant, they just had their first baby, and he let us know he was going on paternity leave, and this is how long it was going to be, and don't call him during this time. He'll be working remotely during this time, and then he'll be back during this time. He came in this morning and showed me a picture of his precious baby that he was bringing to put on his desk. So, but I think that a lot of our clients are very traditional. They don't realize that dads really do want to spend time with their newborn babies. Yeah. And so how do we deal with that? And our clients are really struggling with those things. I think that there is a lot of money. People have gotten vaccine cards with $100 on it, and they've gotten cards for this, and and money for that. And so I do think that that is definitely part of the challenge for a certain segment of workers. But the challenge, I was talking to a client who has an engineering firm, large engineering firm yesterday, and he said, I want to retire. I want to stop. We all said, plan on this, succession planning. You're out of, around this age. And he said, I can't leave. We can't get engineers at any price. We can't get qualified engineers. So the idea of headhunting and cherry picking is unbelievable right now. I never thought in my career that I would see as many people being picked away from government and civil service jobs into the private sector. That used to be considered sort of, that's government, they're not as good. Oh my gosh, that's not true anymore. And vice versa. Oh, wow. Because government realizes I've got to have talent too. And, their pay scales aren't necessarily as good. So you come in maybe for the benefits, maybe for the retirement. So everybody's trying to compete with the tools that they have. But flexibility, remote work opportunities, those are amazingly important to people right now. And so companies we have some clients who just absolutely not, okay, pandemic's over, come back to work. And there are some who you have to do that. I mean, a hospital, a chemical plant, whatever. But the reality is, even just a regular office, like you said, Dell let people stay out for a long time. And now some are doing hybrid. Some organizations are saying don't come back at all. Peru and what's the other country? Portugal are actually advertising that they're great places to live for people who are working remotely. Wow. And they have tax incentives to get people to come there, tax incentives to buy property that you will be, and you don't have to give up your citizenship. And how do I know all this? Because I have a client who's doing that, and I'm amazed. But that's what you're going to see, because I don't think we can go back. I don't think we'll ever go back. I think that, we talked about real estate and development. There are a lot of people who are saying, I don't need to spend the money that I was spending before on this bricks and mortar. I do probably need a presence, whether I'm a retail outlet or whether I'm a commercial business that has office workers. But I probably would do better by having some of this and some of that, which is really uncomfortable for people who've never done that before.
The world has changed so much. And it's just like, one of those, critical moments where everything shifts and you think, how is this possibly going to work? And then everyone starts working remotely, and you know what? Right. It works in some instances, not in all.
And so that's where excuse me for interrupting, but that's where the personality and the leadership style of the person in charge really begins to show up. So those of us who are control freaks, we want to see people. We want to walk by and see what they're doing. We want to glance at their computer screen and make sure that they're not shopping or surfing or watching YouTube or whatever. This has been hard for them, and they are dying to get everybody back in so they can lay eyes on them. Yeah. And I promise you, those organizations are going to lose. Having at least some flexibility. I was working with a company in St. Tammany Parish, and their controller is 2 parishes away, but he's very talented. It's very hard to get a controller. And so he had house damage in Hurricane Ida, and my client called and said, I don't know what to do. He wants to work remotely. And I said, there's got to be a compromise in here. Certainly he's the controller. He needs to be in the office at predictable times. Well, they came up with the solution of 2 days a week. You stay home. One of them is a Monday or a Friday, and they came up with the schedule. So he's got a nice sort of opportunity to not have to fight traffic on a Friday, be home another day in the week, but they know that 3 days out of the week he is going to be there. Yeah. And it's just a win-win. The guy's thrilled.
So we have, I'm on the board of a company in Dallas, a development company, and our CFO is in Seattle.
Yeah.
And has been for a number of years and works fine.
Yeah.
But Christel, we'll take a quick break there, get a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. We would like to thank Modus for their support of the NXT Entrepreneur Podcast. Who is Modus? Modus is a facility services company that works in the e-commerce fulfillment industry across the United States. What do? They like to say they take it from the conveyor to the dock door. Well, what does that mean? It means that they're building the pick stations with the cable management. They're installing guardrails and bollards. They're putting down floor marking. They're putting up aerial signage. These guys build fencing systems, shelving systems, and racking systems. They also do rack recovery for when there's rack failures. They also install dock levelers and dock doors. Modus also installs ASRS systems, which is automated storage and retrieval systems, as well as other robotics projects. They've worked for the largest e-commerce retailers in the world, and they can work for you. If you need to find Modus, you can reach them online at modusmoves.com. And we are back with Dr. Christel Slaughter with SSA Consultants. So, Christel, let's talk about how to build a great team, because I think that's something that you guys help business with very well.
Yes. I spent Wednesday of last week at Top Golf with a leadership team, and it was a marvelous day, but it was a challenging day, and with a little bit of golf and friendly competition thrown in, and an open bar afterwards, which helped with the team building.
Oh, yeah.
But I will tell you what they were struggling with, and this is not unusual, and this is a very large organization, but that leadership team has come from a variety of sites. They have not all worked together for years. Some have, some haven't. Some worked together long ago at a different location. So in trying to become a team, they don't trust one another. And so it's very difficult to really be a high-performing team if you don't trust one another. Yeah. I'm second-guessing, why did he not tell me that? Or I'm defensive, and I bring it up, and now I've marred our relationship, and then, it gets to be, a back and forth, and I'm complaining to my people about you, and you're complaining to your people about me, and they begin to take on those behaviors, and then it laces up, down in the organization, and, you begin to have departments that just can't stand one another and don't work well together, and that can go on for years.
A toxic culture.
Right. Hatfields and McCoys, people can't even tell you how it started. It becomes a toxic culture. So having that trust is really important, and part of what makes it challenging is organizations don't spend enough time letting people build trust with one another. So they might have some opportunities at work, but sometimes it's literally going off to Top Golf, and while people are hitting, they're, asking questions of one another or talking about outside of work things. And that's how you really get to know someone and build trust. And so I'm disclosing a little bit about myself, and you're learning about me, and You're doing the same with me. The other thing that they were struggling with, which is also very common, is they avoid conflict inside the meetings. So we don't trust one another. We have real issues we ought to be talking about, but if we brought them up, people would have strong disagreements with one another, so we don't bring them up. And the only way you're going to get better is to do that. Years ago, we had a partner who had been president of a chemical company, and he was an organic chemist, but he had been through so many experiences with teams, and he suggested that our partner group get in a room together and tell one another what we felt the other partner did very, very well, and what we've learned from them, and have all respect for them. And then, if they could fix something, what would really make them effective? And we were using the Hogan leadership instrument. It's a very wonderful, valid, personality-based leadership instrument. And so we started off talking about our each of our results, but then we led into this exercise, and it was really, really effective. And it pulled us together as a team because you trusted that everybody was focused on the same goal. We all wanted the company to be more successful. And the reason why people were giving me this opportunity for improvement feedback was not because they wanted to hurt me in any way. In fact, they wanted me to be better so that we could all be better. And when you begin to develop teamwork and a culture where it's open enough for people to do that, there's no substitute for that. Nobody can touch you. You are going to be more efficient, more productive. You're not going to have to go back. You have less redundancy in work. And so the problem is that a lot of organizations don't realize the value of that. And in fact, they're moving so fast, they sometimes will pull people from one team to another, not realizing that that can really set the dynamics of the team back tremendously.
Man, you're getting me fired up here. I love this.
It's a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, I can see how incredibly effective that could be.
Yeah. And the other thing that we find out is inadvertently, and I was on a call with a law firm yesterday, and we were talking about this. We're working on a compensation system. They they have some attorneys who've been there 8, 9, 10 years, who are non-equity partners or not even quite yet partners, but are very talented. They don't want them picked off. They want them to stay. But they went through an incentive program that rewarded individual business development and individual production. And unfortunately, those types of things can, not always, but often, create inter-competition between team members. And so if I had, we had a system like that at SSA years ago, quite honestly, and people would get a call, my client needs this, or I'm working with a client, and now they need this service. Well, I'm not the best person to give that service, but unfortunately, I'm rewarded. If I hoard that, I'm going to keep that. Right. And I'm not going to tell anybody else. And I'm sure not going to bring in the guy who's really good because they might start working with them. Yeah. And so it was a disincentive. Right. And so what we like to do is have individual goals and targets and performance bonuses on that, but then have a gain sharing system where, and you can tweak the percentages or more or less of one or the other, but we all win when we all win. Yeah. And so how you marry those two can really be interesting, and it's fun to work with an organization that's willing to try things like that.
So in building a great team, talk about the importance of hiring an A player.
There's no substitute for it. I think the hiring process, the more I watch, and certainly now with the Great Resignation, as you noted, the Container Store, my husband Bill was on a panel years ago in, I believe it was in Austin, and the CEO of the Container Store was on the panel. And he said, our philosophy is one great is worth 3 goods. It's not enough to be good if you can have somebody great. And what that means is that you have to be so intentional in the hiring process. We had Roland Toops come and talk to the Leadership Academy that we do with the business report, and he said, hire slowly, fire quickly. Not that they fire a lot of people, but the point was take your time,
get the right person,
have panel interviews, make sure the person is going to be a good cultural fit, make sure that they have the skills to do the job, check references. We're big on references. We do executive searches, and that's everything. Leopards don't change their spots. So if someone is argumentative, they might interview beautifully, but they're eventually going to find something.
So you have certain instances, it may be in a business or an industry, where you have a rock star, but he is a jerk.
Yes.
And, and toxic, and but he's a rainmaker.
Right.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, you have a choice. So we see this in healthcare. We see it, in salespeople. And oftentimes the person, it could be any job, honestly, any profession, is very, very good at whatever it is they're supposed to do and the visible things. So if it's a nurse, it's he or she works well with the doctors. Doctors love them. They're going to protect them, but they are toxic with their team. They don't do anything that is not visible or going to get them credit. They leave. It can be on a shift, in a lab, and in a plant. They show up everywhere. And those are the most challenging. So I think that there are critical decisions that a true leader has to make all the time. And that's one of the most challenging ones. And you are either going to sacrifice your whole team for this individual, or you're going to deal with the individual and the consequences of whatever the impact is after you try and work with them and try and coach them, maybe even get them outside executive coaching. We do a lot of that nowadays. But at the end of the day, if they can't be part of the team, they're really destroying the organization, and they're making it harder and harder. And we'll go in and pull data and look at HR data and retention data. And sometimes you'll see one unit or one area of an organization where they've had just turnover over and over and over again. And sometimes you go in, sometimes it's a toxic supervisor, sometimes it's a toxic teammate. And it's amazing how many times the organization just doesn't want to see it. They don't want to admit that it's there because the results seem to be good. But it's just like an NBA team, until Michael Jordan came along, all the top teams were like the Celtics. This is an old example, right? Very balanced scoring, a lot of good people on the team. We had Pete Maravich at LSU, and he would score 44 points in a game. I remember my husband telling me they were interviewing Coach Rupp from Kentucky. He was coming into, Baton Rouge and the legendary Pete Maravich, and he said, yeah, he'll score probably 44, maybe 46 points, but we're going to score a lot more than that, so we're not worried. And it's true. It's, the sports analogies really work when you talk about teamwork. Yeah, so, one star does not carry the whole team. Yeah. Now, if they're generous and they want to bring people along, they can. But lots of times,
I asked you that question about the jerk and the high performer, because I think I saw you had mentioned something about that, and I think you referenced Netflix having some philosophy about those yes. kind of guys. I can't remember what the saying was.
Yeah, it's not good enough to be a brilliant jerk at Netflix. You don't make it, right? You could be brilliant, but if you're a jerk, you're out. Jerks. You're out. Zappos gives people $1,000 bonus to leave. So I think if you've crossed the line and you're not a good employee, you're not going to get that bonus. Yeah. But if this isn't a good fit, if this isn't working, then maybe you'll be happier somewhere else or do better somewhere else. And so no harm, no foul, and we're going to help you leave.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. I read about that. That's a really cool thing. Well, Christel, it has been a pleasure. I know that we could talk for many more hours. I think I love business as much as you do, which is saying a lot, and I love talking about it. So I thank you for sharing your stories with us. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
And continued success with all that you do.
Totally enjoyed it.
Can you tell how much I love doing this podcast? It is such a treat to meet people like Christel Slaughter. So top 5 things that I admire about Christel. Number 1 is her brilliance. She is incredibly intelligent and just has a radiant smile. Second is she's an incredible communicator. She is so easy to listen to, and you know that she communicates very effectively with her clients. Third thing is her confidence, which comes from her wealth of experience over decades through all sorts of businesses and all sorts of industries. The fourth thing is the passion that she has for the success of her clients. And she told the story about one of the employees, and she was saying, look, if you are not excited about when one of your clients takes one of your ideas, puts it into play, and it's a great success, then you're in the wrong business. And that speaks volumes there. And fifth thing is the sense of community. We didn't talk much about her charitable service, but she has done that forever. And she has given back to the community in a great way. She's a great asset to our great state. So we appreciate Christel coming in. We appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur Podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.